what guild he belonged to, and whether he wanted to join them. But Ted pushed everyone aside and extended his hand to shake. But Cloud, in his usual proud manner, told them not to stand in his way. He told them that if he had not seen an official invitation, he would not tolerate any questions. The players of the Radiance Guild sat in the camp and listened to various news. Their leader looked at the carnage left behind by the mysterious stranger. He asked his comrades who they thought he was. At first it seemed that he was an archer, but no matter how much they guessed, they could not figure out who this guy was. One of the players was whining about his date falling through for some unknown reason, but he blamed it all on Cloud. The leader of the Radiance looked through all the records available on the network. He was very interested in the topic. The red-haired witch told the leader not to worry, because he could easily get this guy into the guild. There should have been a lot of hype about the first purge, but everyone kept talking about this stranger. There was something to envy, the thug said. The boss listened to his men arguing about everything and nothing and thought about his own things. They thought the stranger's star was an artificial sensation, but he thought otherwise. Even when everyone left, he continued to watch different videos and analyze them. A witch in a wide-brimmed hat came up to him and said that it was quite interesting. Jesse noticed that the abilities were similar to magic, but slightly different. The leader was surprised that the word entertaining was in the dictionary of the outstanding sorceress. The girl with the sweet face didn't answer and just smiled. This man was interesting to her. The Berserker Guild had set up a temporary camp and were also impressed by Cloud's performance. Leia started screaming and cursing again because she told everyone that this weirdo was not ordinary and no one believed her. They tried to calm her down, but she still wouldn't calm down. For some reason, the arrogant stranger irritated her more and more. The Foreigners Guild also tried to inquire about the newly discovered newcomer. The guild leader received an order to recruit him to his side and promised to fulfill it. The radio began broadcasting urgent news from the scene again. The second zone was successfully cleared, and the Radiance group became the first in this matter, overtaking their rivals. Only the Vampire Rift remains, and players from all over the world are preparing to enter it. Considering how high the stakes were, there was a lot of tension among the players. If the rift is broken, the entire country will be plunged into chaos. Cloud watched the news, he returned home, and as usual took a shower to warm up. He himself was surprised that he became a much-discussed figure in one day. People couldn't understand why Cloud didn't wear any magical accessories. But he simply didn't have it, Lai thought, because people looked for deeper meaning in everything. An expert was called into the news to explain how one gesture could summon rocks. The expert on camera began to describe how the fight went, but overall he didn't say anything new. The observers did not miss the fact that Cloud stood to the side. They thought that he wanted to say something by doing this, but he simply ran out of mana. Lei thought they were lucky he didn't say anything, because otherwise everyone would think he was rude, and he looked into the inventory. This time he got a rare item that only the player could touch, a necklace with a blood curse. Cursed items could be cleansed, and then they would give random effects like a lottery. Usually they would just be thrown away because of this. But there was another way to use the item, to perform an exorcism rite, a special skill of the demon hunter. Although the main purpose of the skill was to kill the demon without causing harm to the possessed person. With the sacrifice, it was different. Lai would be able to literally invite the demon into his consciousness, similar to how demons affect people, although the risks were great. While he was thinking, someone called him on the phone, although it was already late in the evening. Lai became nervous, wondering what John might have to say about his previous interview with Ted. It was hard to imagine what Cloud would say if he picked up the phone now. Lai knew he had to answer politely. So he answered briefly, problematically, and the brothers experienced a sense of déjà vu. Ted wanted to apologize for the previous offer and offer more favorable terms. They watched a recording of their last conversation with Cloud. This strange guy was surrounded by fighters on all sides, and everyone wanted his attention. He was shaking then, and Ted thought that Cloud was barely holding back his anger, but in reality the noble was simply experiencing mana exhaustion. But since Cloud wasn't answering their calls, there was nothing they could do, Ted realized, and the vampire count was more important right now. Moreover, the progress of destruction continued to increase, and at that moment an earthquake occurred again. Ted turned around to understand what was happening and what to do. Alarms were sounding everywhere. The vampire's rift was destroyed and his castle appeared in reality. The death toll was huge because in the fantasy world, no one prepares for emergencies. Ted and the others stood frozen in horror at the impending disaster. Before them stood the vampire count's fortress, frozen in its gloomy splendor. Everyone heard footsteps and turned around. A strange guy who was on everyone's lips appeared on the battlefield. They recognized him as Cloud, whose face had been all over the news. People were even more surprised when Cloud headed to the vampire's castle all alone. As he approached, the eyes of the huge demonic statue glowed red. Cloud gave her a disdainful look and found this architectural miscarriage disgusting. And the whole image of the vampire fortress did not at all correspond to its name. It looked more like an ugly palace. But even that was too much for a lousy vampire, the aristocrat said. All because Lai had come up with a huge and luxurious mansion for Cloud's family. The stone statue stirred like a gargoyle awakening from sleep. For a second, Lai was frightened and thought that the statue had heard him. She moved from her place, striking him with her enormous size. People were horrified by such a terrible enemy. The stone demon was over 10 meters tall. Cloud stood at its feet completely defenseless when the monster swung its sword. But Cloud didn't even think about running. As soon as he waved his hand, the demon disintegrated into a pile of stones. The Radiance Guild stood in full force next to the vampire's castle and heard the noise. It sounded very familiar, like in those videos with the strange guy. And the sorceress Jessie immediately became interested. They were about to enter the fortress, but the sorceress left the group without permission. Using magic, she went straight ahead, simply jumping through the air. Those who witnessed Cloud's ability were stunned by his power. He did it with one swing. Lei thought how lucky he was that the demon was an enchanted stone, and Cloud kept crucifying the vampire's terrible artistic taste. A loud cry from dozens of people was heard from behind, and Cloud turned around. The bounty hunters sensed their chance to loot and rushed to the fortress when they realized that the dread guard had fallen. Lai was surprised. It looked as if the murder of the guard was a signal flare for these dummies. His class quest updated and Lai winced in alarm, while Cloud resolutely walked into the fortress. Lai wanted them to come up with a plan first. They had a huge difference in levels with the vampire, but the proud aristocrat, without thinking, went forward. He was a demon hunter, but these words could not convince or calm Laius. They entered the banquet hall. The spacious room was empty. Cloud immediately noticed the tasteless portraits of a vampire on the walls of the hall. Where the proud aristocrat walked forward, Ted could barely take a step. He was breathing heavily, so his squad began to worry about their leader. Ted put on a brave face and said he was fine, just a little out of breath. Ever since they entered the room full of paintings, he had the feeling that someone was looking at him all the time. It was like an abnormal status that demons impose, Ted said, and John realized it was the paintings. Once they had burned all the nasty paintings to the ground, Ted felt better. Because of this trap in the castle, most of the players who entered it first had already retreated, exhausted. Statues, portraits, tasteless wallpaper, everything caused an outrage against the sense of beauty and imposed an abnormal status. No matter how strong the barbarian class Ted had was, he was so easily influenced by the demons and didn't know how to overcome it. But the most painful thing for Cloud was the wretched portraits. He was outraged that such abomination was hanging there so that no one would want to eat. The statues were also disgusting. Cloud regretted the stone that was broken for them, and the number of portraits hinted at the vampire's megalomania and narcissism. The structure of the castle, the passages, the dead ends, the unnecessary turns. All of this caused pain to the real aristocrat. Finally, Cloud walked out to the main hall and looked at the stairs with huge doors at the top. This was the very place he was looking for. Structurally, it was the center of the castle, and the aristocrat's intuition never failed him. The vampire was somewhere here. It was quiet, and Lai realized that the other players had not yet arrived. But one sorceress was still here, and she was not looking for a vampire at all. Jessie greeted him, hanging from the air. Smiling, she said that she had seen his very strange magic. Slowly, the girl swayed around her axis and assumed a normal position. Lai saw levitation magic in action for the first time and was amazed. He envied that for her to use magic, that to drink water. While Lai was saving every bit, Jessie was peppering him with questions, wanting to know what his skill was, and was beside herself with delight. There was no magic skill she didn't know, Jessie chirped, but Cloud didn't respond. And then he reminded her of etiquette, since the flying woman was invading his personal space too much. With a slight movement, he moved her to the designated place for the interlocutor, at arm's length. Etiquette is a basic thing that everyone should strive for, Cloud told her proudly. Jessie looked at him closely and realized that this guy was determined and would not give in. But at that moment, their acquaintance was interrupted by the great and terrible vampire who came out of his room. There was no doubt that it was a demon, because Cloud immediately felt the activation of his hunter skills. Count Asakura smugly called them pathetic people who dared to wake him up. Jessie felt an unimaginably strong pressure and asked Cloud how he was. But Cloud responded to the vampire's greeting with no less arrogance and pride and mocked Asakura's title. He took out of his pocket the cursed necklace that had fallen to him earlier, and he told the ghoul that he would teach him a lesson that he would remember for a long time, showing him the necklace. Cloud activated the exorcism rite skill and said that he would teach him to be a true aristocrat, so Lai could summon the vampire into their minds and win. Considering there were two of them, they had the advantage. But how was he going to instill fear in him, Lai asked. And Cloud replied that he was a demon hunter. As if that explained anything, there was a huge difference in their levels and there was a possibility that they would become possessed. The vampire only increased his pressure and said that it was just a dirty necklace and that they would not succeed. The vampire liked this bravado, but to him Cloud was just a worm. Jesse realized that the ghoul was taking back the power that he had given to his monsters. Lai understood this better than anyone. The difference in their levels was already huge, and if the ghoul absorbed all of his given powers, the gap would become even greater. But suddenly the demon's face changed and he felt confused. The ghoul stood confused in the middle of the cave. His palace disappeared. He turned around, sensing Cloud, and asked what this place was. But the demon was not going to fall for such pathetic tricks. The ghoul, seriously angry, rushed at Cloud. Magic flared up, explosions were heard, rocks cracked, thick smoke poured out. The vampire already thought that he had won. But he heard Cloud's voice behind him, saying that everything was not what it seemed. The demon did not understand how he survived and was confused. Cloud told him to take a closer look at himself. And the ghoul sensed something was wrong. His overwhelming attacks weren't working here. Instead, he saw Cloud sitting on his body, as if he had just killed him. Even though these were illusions, they clouded the demon's already weak mind. The ghoul screamed and threw magic at random, almost hitting Jessie. She tried to understand what was happening. The ghoul was screaming shrilly throughout the castle. Cloud didn't move, and the vampire lost his mind. He was scared to death. And indeed, Jessie looked at the ghoul who was writhing on his knees and holding his head. There was a powerful explosion that blew off the entire roof of the castle. Lai was horrified because they almost died just now. He didn't even have time to react. And Jessie thought that he had predicted everything, that the attack would pass by. The exorcism ritual attacks only the demon without harming the host. Using the offering reveals the hidden effect of the ritual. The demon received an invitation to the ritual of hunters. In this fight, the one with the higher mental stability stats wins. No demon could shake Cloud. Lai himself didn't expect that it would have such an effect. Jessie was shocked. The sight was incredible, and she asked what was happening to the vampire. He screamed into nowhere, attacked an empty place where there was no one, and showed all the signs of madness. It was like the fear that demons instill in people. The vampire himself became susceptible to it. Cloud smiled contentedly when he received the notification that the quest had been completed. It was time to finish, and he took out the blade. Jessie did not understand how it was possible to instill fear in a vampire with a spell. He lay pitiful and broken on the floor of his palace, without a shadow of his former grandeur. Cloud stood frozen over the vampire's body, a dagger in his hand. He struck, but was barely able to leave any damage. So in his proud manner, the aristocrat ordered Jessie to finish the fight. The sorceress was surprised by such a request that he wanted to give this experience to her. He could have killed the vampire alone, but why, she asked. Lai would have liked to, but the difference in levels couldn't just be overcome. If Jessie had come this far, she had to be strong, so he could hardly restrain himself from rushing her. Jessie realized that she needed to finish off the vampire before asking Cloud questions, and she called upon her magic. She realized that by killing the vampire, she would become stronger, and then new spells would be learned on their own, the sorceress suggested, surprising Lai. Jessie summoned lightning and began to burn the frightened vampire. It hit hard. Lee gained a bunch of levels. The mission was completed. Jessie bent over a pile of ashes. She was astonishing because she killed such a high-level demon with one blow, even though he was weakened. It was the power of a top-level player. The sorceress reached her finger towards the ashes, and then she decided to taste it, and Cloud swore off, shaking her hand. Lai wanted to shout at her to stop the nastiness, but he couldn't. They received a notification about a new class assignment. Someone called the sorceress by name and they turned around. After the death of the vampire, all the anomalies that lowered the status were removed, and the Radiance Guild reached the main hall first. They asked her if she had killed the demon, and the girl did not know how to explain everything. The leader of the squad recognized the same guy who was appearing everywhere. Jessie told Cloud that although she didn't know etiquette, she promised to try her best to learn it. She introduced herself to him formally and asked him to state his name if he wished. The sorceress's companions were very surprised by this change in her behavior. The aristocrat and the sorceress stood opposite each other. Cloud thought that although she lacked manners, he decided to teach her. After all, she is a proud person who swore to change, so he introduced himself by his estate lie. There was a stew boiling on the stove. The TV was on in the room and the latest news was playing. The woman was talking to someone on the phone while her daughter was watching TV. But she saw something that made her run to her mother as fast as she could. She invited her to see it herself, because the news was showing stories about the recently completed cleanup of a dangerous vault. Erin, that was the girl's name, told her mother that their Uncle Lai was on TV and the woman did not understand why her brother would be there. But when she approached the screen, she recognized her brother's face, although his hair had changed color. It was indeed him, and they were both very surprised by it. Cloud's habits and character completely controlled their life together in one body. He was once again engaged in general cleaning. His phone was constantly ringing off the hook. Trouble came from an unexpected place. All the media focused on him after defeating the vampire, so it was only a matter of time before his family found out about him. His 3 older sisters, with whom he had been very close since childhood. More precisely, they were close to each other, but he was always driven away, so now he didn't even want to pick up the phone. But things were much worse, because the enemy had crept right up to his house and was already besieging the doors. The sisters shouted to him that they knew he was home and demanded that he open the door for them. They became increasingly indignant, and Lai thought that now they would simply break down the doors. Therefore, he had no choice but to capitulate so as not to make any more noise. Putting on the suit, Cloud told them that they were disturbing the neighbors with their screaming. He politely asked his dear sisters to calm down, hoping that his aristocratic manners would work. Their reactions were mixed. The youngest sister, Mira, made a face of disgust. The middle one, Gina, was surprised. The eldest, Inui, was worried. Needless to say, after all this, Lai became a star, and stories about him were constantly shown on TV. Despite requests for comment, he disappeared from the radar. John realized that he was not the only one who had difficulty communicating with this man. Ted brought him a cup of hot cocoa to perk him up and charge his brain with endorphins for better performance. Because Lee rejected all their offers, John became completely distraught. They still had an advantage, Ted told him.